some of these we're going to kind of go through fairly quickly because I think there's self-explanatory. For example, taking appropriate precautions for safety, resident, visitors, employees. I just want to make sure everybody is very aware that once someone steps onto your property, that you do have a responsibility to make sure that they are in a safe environment. So, and once again, I'm going to stress that word reasonable. But just make sure that if your facility is maintained and safe, clean, sanitary, there really shouldn't be issues. But the facility needs to have policies and procedures to show how that's going to be done, and then they need to make sure those policies and procedures are implemented. Continuing on to maintenance, the premises shall be well kept and in good repair. In P148, facilities shall ensure that the grounds are well kept, the exterior of the buildings, including sidewalks, steps, porches, ramps, and fences, are in good repair. And be really careful about this. If you have a crack in your sidewalk, I'm not going to come, and a gay's not going to come, surveyors are going to come and say, you have to tear up all the sidewalks and redo them. But if that crack in the sidewalk has lifted up, and you have residents that are tripping and falling, I mean, you've got some liability there. So maybe you don't need to replace the whole thing. Maybe there's a way to fix that. But they do have, these things have to be kept in good repair. Gutters during the windstorm that we had in Kentucky, during the ice storm that we had in Kentucky, I can't tell you how many gutters were on the ground. I did not rush out the day after to say, let me go write all these deficiencies. I mean, at the same time, that's, you know, we want to be reasonable in our office. So if a facility has an event where there is a problem and they're taking care of it, if you could show me things like, for example, we had ABC contractor come out and they've given us an estimate for this, and we've signed a contract and they start on this day, and it's not something like there's a hole in the roof and the residents' bed's underneath it and they're getting rained on, but it's something where, you know, you are getting something fixed, that's reasonable. But now to tell me, oh, well, they can't start for 8 months, or I have to save up $200,000 before those things aren't really reasonable. So just kind of keep it on a reasonable, individual, case-by-case basis. And if you're having difficulty or you've got a question, pick up the phone or call. Let's find out what it is you're doing. We may be able to give you some recommendations. We may be able to tell you that's acceptable, that's not. So we want to work with you. The interior of the building, including walls, ceilings, floors, windows, window coverings, doors, plumbing, electrical fixtures, shall be in good repair. So if you've got all of your light fixtures, or your light switches, the little plates are cracked, that's not good repair. Or half of it's missing, or it's not there at all. I mean, those are problems. Outlet switches, I see that a lot. And I don't know why, but outlet switches behind beds lots of times don't have plate covers. I don't know if you robbed Peter to pay Paul and just forgot to put a new one on, and they're 22 cents at Lowe's. So keep some extra ones somewhere, the maintenance director, something, so that you can take care of those. And I'm going to ask, or the surveyor's going to ask, what's your system for identifying this stuff? Do you do a walkthrough? Is there a checkoff list? Show me something. So when I come in, a plate cover that's cracked or missing may not be an automatic deficiency, but then when I find out you have no system of identifying that, the resident says, well, it's been like that since I moved in a year ago, and nobody in the facility knows about it, there's a system failure there. Now, and maybe it didn't result to anything serious, or maybe it could. You know, a plate cover missing could be that you've got a resident who's tinkering around with the electricity. So, and we've had that happen also, where the resident was actually trying to wire an appliance they had directly into the facility. Remember, electricians sometimes end up in personal care homes. Navy SEALs end up in personal care homes. So don't just assume that, you know, that plate cover's missing because it got broke by housekeeping and knocked off or something. Sometimes just a little bit of, you know, a couple of questions here or there. And the resident was very friendly and offered, oh, no, I took that off. It's in the drawer. I'm trying to get this, you know, whatever. They told us right up front what they were doing. I said, well, let's get the administrator and let you talk to them about that. So be very careful. Just make sure that your building, and once again, I kind of use this thing. If the local news channel was there with you, standing in this residence room with cameras on, showing your community, would you be able to say, oh, well, we think having the blinds half torn up and the window cracked is acceptable? You know you would. So just kind of, that's how I kind of do it. I look at things, how's this going to look if I'm on the front page of the newspaper or on the local news station? So sometimes that's a good judge for things. Garbage and trash shall be stored in areas separate from those used for the preparation and storage of food. It shall be removed from the premises regularly. Containers shall be cleaned regularly. I can't tell you how many times trash cans are just so nasty. There needs to be a routine that you're having trash cans cleaned. This says cleaned regularly. I truly would suggest that you have a schedule. Now that's just a suggestion. There's not a requirement. But if we come out there and they're dirty, once again, we're going to be asking, what's your system? If you can say, well, you came out on Thursday and Friday is the day we wash these cans every single Friday, and you got a checkoff list, you got 4 staff who confirm that, there's not a problem. But if you're like, oh, well, we clean them when they get dirty, well, no, you don't. So I don't know how long it's been that way. That gives you something to give me so we move on to something else. And really and truly, that's one of the things you want to do. The faster I'm in your facility, you show me everything I need, the faster I get out. The longer I'm there, guess what? The more opportunities I have when I'm trying to find out this to see this over here. And that happens all the time. We go out for something and we end up citing something else. And lots of times it has because we can't find what we need and we're digging and digging, and then there you go. So, pest control programs shall be in operation of the facility. Services shall be provided by maintenance personnel of the facility by contract with a pest control company. And then we need to make sure that care is taken to use the least flammable, effective insecticides and rodenticides. The compound should be stored under lock. So if you have chemicals of that nature, your maintenance director or whoever's using at your facility, make sure they are very, very aware of what these chemicals are capable of, the dangers of them, how to use them, and that they can answer those questions, okay? If you have a pest control contract, make sure you have a copy of that contract. Let us know how often they come out if the contract doesn't say that. And what would happen if you discovered something 2 months after they were out? You found ants, or you found, does your contract allow you to call them and then to come back out and do periodic checkups or take care of some sort of infestation or whatever? So those things are important that you let us be able to show that and verify what you're doing with that. Dining areas shall be available to the residents, and that is important. I have been in facilities where a particular resident was not allowed to use the dining room because she was too messy when she ate her meals. That's inappropriate. We need to work with the resident, find something else to do. But you can't say, you can't come in here, you can't come in here because you're a pig. You make a mess. It bothers everybody else. We got to find a different way to deal with that. Therapeutic diets, if they're provided, and the designated person responsible for food service is not a dietitian or a nutritionist, consultation by qualified staff, dietitian or nutritionist, shall be provided. And you're going to have to be able to show us who you're using, what their qualifications are. Maybe you have a contract with them. How often do they come in? What are you doing? How this is working. And if you say upon admission somebody wants to come into your facility and they're on a specialized diet and you can't meet that, don't accept them and then later tell, oh, well, we don't do that. If you accept somebody from care, you're saying we can meet your needs and we're going to meet your needs, okay?
Is there any other diet other than regular or any modified diet at all? Or
I'm sorry, I hear your question, but I don't understand what you're asking.
For therapeutic diets, is that anything other than, do you all consider the therapeutic diet anything other than regular, or like if we modify just their meats, or if it's pureed, or?
I consider any diet other than a regular diet a therapeutic diet. Is that?
You agree?
Yeah. The reg also states later on that a modified diet has to have positional too, so they're kind of used in interchangeably.
interchangeable, okay. Jackie is the complaints coordinator in Lexington. She's also a dietitian, so, see, we're very lucky today, so.
So if we take 4 or 5 diets and we have menus approved by a dietitian for every one of those diets that we follow on 4-week cycles, we're good.
You still have to have a consultant dietitian on board.
In addition to,
Where are you getting the approved diets from?
a dietitian that our company corporately employs to do our menus for all of our facilities.
Then you have a consultant dietitian, is that, yeah.
But I mean, she doesn't make, routine rounds.
But as long as you can get that information from that consultant. Yeah, because it doesn't say they have to be in Kentucky. You just have to have that consultant dietitian. So if you have an issue with something, you can channel that through your corporate office and get information from that person, right? That's easy. Does that sound, menus shall be planned in writing and rotated to avoid repetition. And one of the things I want to bring up here real quick is almost without exception, residents in personal care, skilled, almost any level of care that's long-term care, food is one of the most important things in their lives. So many things you've had to give up. Food's not one of them that people want to give up. And I like food, and I don't like bad food. So it's very important that we remember that when we're looking at dietary needs and we're looking at nutrition. Nutrition needs of residents shall be met in accordance with current recommended dietary allowances of the Food and Nutrition Board, the National Resource Council, adjusted for age, sex, and activity, and in accordance with physician's orders. So just be very aware of the fact that there are federal guidelines and that not one amount of food would be appropriate or type of diet would be appropriate for every single person in your facility. There should be at least a 3-day supply of food to prepare well-balanced, palatable meals. And I want to talk about 2 things here. Well-balanced and palatable. I think it's obvious, 3-day supply. We want to be careful. Food needs to taste good. And it needs to look good on the plate. I'm a little weird. I don't mind my food touching, but I don't want it swimming in, juice of one thing and everything else is floating around in it. And my bread's soaked in it. That's not palatable. And I've been to many facilities where tray line, food starts out on the steam table looking great. By the time it gets on the plate and gets to the resident, it's a mess. And even if it tastes good, it just looks awful. Because we eat with our eyes first. So don't forget that. Food should be prepared with consideration for any individual dietary requirement. Modified diets, this is what Jackie was talking about, nutrients, concentrates, and supplements shall be given only on the written orders of a physician. And the resident can decline. Okay? I know I'm on a low sodium diet, give me the salt. Now, I would say, well, can we talk about that? You understand that the reason you're on this diet, and by not following the diet, these are possible outcomes. And then I would also notify the physician, well, she's choosing not to do this. But at least the facility has educated and informed the physician. You've done what you can. But don't let, it come to the enforcement agency that, that resident has diabetes and we've decided they're going to eat this and they're going to eat this. So this resident has heart disease, so we've decided they're going to follow this. And they are. They're eating wonderful diets, but it's not what they want. And you're forcing them to eat something they don't want. That's not appropriate. At least 3 meals per day should be served with not more than 15 hours span between the evening meal and the breakfast meal, okay? So you can't have more than 15 hours between those 2 meals. Between meal snacks, to include an evening snack before bedtime, shall be offered to all residents. Adjustments can be made when medically contraindicated, okay? And if that's the case, make sure you have something from the doctor. Does everybody understand that? Sometimes that gets a little confusing, I think, for some people. But you have to offer that evening snack. They don't have to take it. but there cannot be more than 15 hours between the evening meal and the breakfast meal. So on this particular day, we served the evening meal a little earlier, and then the next morning, because the cook was late and had all these other problems, we scheduled the breakfast meal later, and there ends up being 16 hours. You're out of regulatory compliance. Dietary services, continued. Food should be prepared by methods that conserve nutritive value, flavor, and appearance. There's nothing worse than gray broccoli. Should be attractively served at proper temperatures. Be careful when you have food lines where you have milk sitting out in ice. The milk that's down in the ice water is probably appropriate temperature. The milk that's up next to a steam table, which has a hot light, may not be at the proper temperatures anymore. But of course, you don't know that because it's sealed up. I'll know it because I'll ask for one, I'll open it, I'll put a thermometer in it, and then I'll say, you're serving a hazardous food at a dangerous temperature. So be aware that foods can change temperatures based on things that are located next to it or how long they've set out. And we have dietitians that will ask and open, and not just dietitians, surveyors, period, will open and take temperatures of food. Food being served on the steam table may be appropriate, but by the time the resident gets to eat it, it may no longer be appropriate. So be very careful about your temperatures. And a good gauge of that is to ask the residents, you know, how was your lunch? And if they tell you, well, it was cold, and my gravy's congealed, you know, yuck. So they'll tell you. That's one thing that I feel, lots of times residents won't tell you anything. They'll tell you about the food. That's not a problem usually. Then it goes on to talk about a file of tested recipes adjusted to appropriate yield shall be maintained. Food should be cut, chopped, or ground to meet individual needs. We talked about modified diets. If the doctor orders a modified diet, you need to have that physician's order. You need to be able to follow it. And staff need to be trained. If a resident has something for ground meat or for mechanically soft, does your staff understand what that means? And a diet could be a temporary diet. Maybe somebody had some sort of gastrosurgery that temporarily they're on a special diet. Does your staff understand that? Or will your staff say, oh, well, she just has to have soft foods. We'll give her mashed potatoes and we'll give her banana pudding. Well, does that meet nutritive value? So it's one of the things that staff need to be trained, they need to understand about diets if you're going to have modified or therapeutic diets. Leftover food, all whole food containers or leftover food items should be covered and dated when refrigerated. I want to talk to you about salad dressing, okay? We've got ranch dressing that comes in this big container. Now, the pork chops or the green beans that were left over last night, we've got them in a container. We've got the date they were served on top of them. We open the ranch dressing. We used it for salads. We closed it up. We put it back in. It has an expiration date. Technically, it's kind of a leftover food. You've opened the container. Those are some thoughts to think about what's going on. Because otherwise, that ranch dressing, I probably shouldn't admit this, I wouldn't eat salad dressings in my house if you came to my house. Because they can be in there for a couple of years. So you have to be able to show us that you don't do what Jerry does, okay? You have to be able to show us when this container was opened. Because it's a leftover item, so. I do have a question. Jackie, there's a personal care home in Louisville that has a wine list. And they open wine. Do wines have to be dated? I wouldn't either. Well, I don't think they stay around that long, but. But when in doubt, I say be safe. You know, but I just want to let you know that. And there are things that do come up. Speaking of this, I was at a facility interviewing residents about food. Nobody had complaints about the food. But the one resident did ask me to come to her room later. She wanted to make a formal complaint. A formal complaint was, although the food was good, they had a chef. Their wine list was horrible. And they started explaining to me how they served Beaujolais that was 4 years old, that they should never serve more than 2 years old. So I mean, each resident, they're all individual, they come from different backgrounds. So just be aware that there you may get some complaints, and I tried to take this very serious because for her it was a real concern. Unfortunately, there's not really regulation that I can put that to, except to ask her if I could talk to the facility dietary department about the concerns. In which case, they actually, before I left, had met with her, had actually ordered a couple of the bottles of wine she liked, because she liked to have a Beaujolais every evening. So they met her needs. And it was a facility where she was paying quite a bit of money, and they wanted to make her happy. So there are things that on the surface you may think are, but actually it made her life much better. She enjoyed that. So ice water should be readily available to the residents at all times. Okay? Readily available can be a little subjective. Can that resident, if they want ice water, get that ice water? And if they can, we don't have an issue. But if they cannot, and that's where it becomes subjective. Can this resident get up and go get a glass of water if she's thirsty at 2 o'clock in the morning? If it's right next to her bedside table, maybe that's easy for her. If she's at risk for falls at 2 o'clock in the morning, do you want her to get up out of bed and have to walk down the hall? So there's a lot of thoughts there that you need to put into that. Is there a water cooler in the facility that anybody can get to and it's not an issue? I mean, there's all kinds of things there. But it talks about ice water. That's not tap water, ice water. Personal care homes shall comply with all applicable provisions of KRS 219.011, KRS 219.081, and this is the Food Establishment Act. Okay? And then 902 KR 45:005, and that's the Retail Food Code. If anybody's interested, this Retail Food Code book, I think if you call the Department of Health and ask them about this particular thing, they have little booklets made up, and they'll send them to you. I did a training a couple of years ago, and they were really nice. They sent me 60 of them and said, this is great. We love to get this information out. So, and then also, that's all available on the internet, too. And it just gives you, those are things that if the health department comes and looks at your kitchen, those are things they're looking at. So it gives you a little bit of heads up on that kind of stuff. Personal care services. Remember we talked about these things. We talked about services you're going to be providing. Shaving, cleaning, trimming of fingernails and toenails. These were under definitions. Cleaning of mouth, teeth, any type of oral hygiene, washing, grooming, cutting of hair. So not only did they do definitions, but they're actually in the regulations. Social recreational activities to stimulate physical and mental abilities to the fullest extent. Encourage and develop a sense of usefulness and self-respect. Each resident is an individual. I've been in personal care homes where the majority of the residents were MIMR. This a little resident at the end of the meal jumps up, hurriedly grabs all of her stuff on her tray, goes to the kitchen, or goes to the door of the kitchen, sets it down, whips out a hairnet, puts her hairnet on, and goes through the kitchen doors. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I grabbed my hairnet, which is embarrassing to say I keep one, but then I go into the kitchen right behind her. She's grabbing little dessert bowls and sticking them in a sink full of water. Not a 3-compartment sink, not sanitized. I mean, and I'm like horrified. Well, they're making her work for her dinner. That's my first thought. She cleans them all. I mean, she's going a million miles an hour. Stacks them all up, takes her hairnet off, says, I'm done, and she leaves. So then I watch the cook comes over. She takes all these dishes on this little tray, takes them and starts stacking them into a dishwasher tray, sticks them in the dishwasher. And I said, can you tell me what did I just see? And they said, well, when this resident lived in the community, she worked in a diner. And her job in the diner was to put all the dishes in the sink and clean them and do this. Well, she wants to do something. So what the facility has done now is, as part of her activities, this is what she does. She feels useful. Now, they realize this is not sanitation. So they turn around and these go into the dishwasher. They're actually meeting sanitary requirements. But this was a little useful thing. They had a sink at the beginning of the door. She doesn't come into the kitchen. she does this little activity. Now, I don't know, Jackie may be frowning at me over there, but it was an activity that met her needs, and I thought it was a nice thing the facility did. I've also seen facilities that have residents that meet new residents, give them kind of a lowdown on the facility. They're like a little welcome wagon to them. So, and I think those things are good. Coming up with beauty pageants. I mean, activities that are a little bit outside the norm. And I know one facility can give you great ideas. You can modify it, you can take it, you can make it your own. But it's very important that your activities are not just something on a board or a piece of paper or a flyer. That they're real activities that people would really enjoy. That they mean something. They have some sort of meaning. And don't make your activities that the activity tonight is visitors. I mean, if it's real visitors where people come in from an organization and they do something, but just to say the activity tonight is television, the activity tonight is visitors, those really aren't meaningful activities. If you have a particular program that everybody enjoys on television, you're doing a meal around it. Tonight we're watching some movie that has to do with maybe India, and because of that, we're going to do an Indian food night. That's an activity. That's something that's interesting. You're always going to have somebody who's not happy, but for the most part, you're actually making that a real activity. So, a resident who likes to be alone and doesn't want to be out in crowds of people and they make them nervous, make sure they have activities that meet their individual needs, as opposed to the resident who's a social butterfly and can't wait to be surrounded by 50 people. Activities outside of the facility, inside the facility. It could be as simple as having a book cart where you bring books in, or a library, a lending library, where residents who love to read, or a staff who stops by who says, "Oh, I've read that book. That's great. What's your best part about it?" That social interaction is very important. Personal care homes should be following requirements related to the provision of activity services. Once again, we're talking about there has to be a person designated by the administrator to be responsible for the activity. Volunteer group programs can be enlisted to assist with carrying out activity programs, but remember, when you have volunteers come in your facility, you're responsible for anyone who comes in your facility, because although you may not be paying them, in a way it's a contract. They're providing activities. And be extra careful, because they are coming from an entity that you would think, oh, this would be safe, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be safe. So be very careful about who you enlist to come into your facility. So if you have a church group or the Boy Scouts or whatever else that seems to be innocuous enough, it's not going to be a big problem here, make sure you have staff there. You are still responsible for the continuous supervision and safety of your residents. So what you don't want to hear is that the Boy Scout punched grandma, or the church leader stole $50 or something. So, because that does happen, you know. A person designated by the administrator should be responsible for this activity program and carry out all those activities, and that needs to be a named individual. Now, they can have assistants, there can be people who are responsible. If on Saturday that person doesn't work, who would be responsible for making sure the activities are carried out? I'll use this example real quick. I went to a personal care home. The residents were all lining up and coming into the big day room, and they were getting their chairs and their pillows, and the activities director had popcorn. They were having movie night. This is really nice. Everybody's happy. They were encouraged to bring their pillows. They curled up on the sofas, and it was really kind of a home-like atmosphere. And I thought, gosh, this looks like fun. Well, then I leave the room. I hear the movie starting. I'm talking. I'm getting some other things I'm doing for my survey. And then I hear this noise. And I'm like, well, that sounds awful. It sounds like somebody screaming. Well, I go in there. The activity director had her daughter come in and bring a movie. Well, it was a slasher movie. So I look around and residents are curled up. One lady's crying. This is MIMR facility. And then in the front, there's one resident leaning forward in his wheelchair, going, "Cutter, cutter." it probably wasn't an appropriate movie for the residents of this nursing facility. So, it was true. I didn't even know where to start. But the 16 or 17-year-old assistant, who was a volunteer helping out, I made her cry. It wasn't my intention, but she thought it was appropriate. She and her friends had watched it the week before. They thought it was great. They had a great time. So she brought it in. So a little oversight there, sometimes from volunteers, is really an appropriate thing. So the residents also ended up having a difficult night that night, getting to sleep and staying asleep. So it didn't really help the staff much either. Programs should be planned for group and individual activities, both inside and outside, as I mentioned. There has to be, this is very important, there has to be a list. The person who's in charge of these activities, and I see this less and less, and I think this is just something that people are not thinking about. They have to maintain a list, a current list of residents in which precautions are noted regarding the resident's condition that might restrict or modify their participation in the program. There's a resident on medication that restricts them to be in the sun. And so the activities director is doing an outing to the facility, and this outing is going to be at a local farm. And we're going to all go pick pumpkins. And they're out in the sun, and they're out there for 4 or 5 hours. And this resident's out there in the sun and not supposed to be. So there can be detrimental consequences from that. So this activities director should have that list to be able to say, oh, wait a minute. Maybe Ms. Smith can go, but we need to make some provisions for her to be out of the sun, a hat, or she can sit under this umbrella, or she can be in the, the little shed that's on the property with covering the picnic table. But something. So, or you may have a resident that when you're out on the outing, you decide to stop and get ice cream, who has issues with being lactose intolerant. Things like that. They need to know special issues. So that activities person should know about special diets, therapeutic diets, modified diets. They should know about medication. They should know about interactions with different things. So it's very important that that activities person has that current list. And I'm telling you, they can get themselves in real trouble real quick if they don't. So make sure that they do. A living or recreation room and outdoor recreational space shall be provided for residents and their guests. But make sure it's comfortable. I invite my family to come visit me, and they're all standing around because what's that suspicious stain on the chair? I'm not sitting on that. This is my home. That's going to be embarrassing to me. Okay? Facilities shall provide supplies and equipment for the activities program, and I have seen some really pitiful supplies. Games that have half the pieces missing, puzzles where most pieces are missing, books that the covers are torn off of. I mean, that's not appropriate supplies. Reading materials, radios, games, TV sets shall be provided for the residents. Okay, that takes care of that set. I think this next one's going to be maximum room capacity, 4 residents, no more. So you cannot have dormitories. 4 residents in a room, and it has to meet the appropriate size of the rooms. Then he goes on to talk about permit not less than 3 foot of space between the beds and at least 3 foot of space between the side of the bed and the nearest wall, fixed cabinet, heating, cooling unit. Okay? So you have to have those measurements. Now, you may set it up this way and it doesn't work, but maybe a little creative thinking, you move the beds, it may work. So, but it also has to be comfortable to the resident. So keep those two thoughts in mind. Beds have to be 36 inches wide, and what is that, a twin bed? So a minimum of 3 feet is required between the foot of a bed, the opposite wall, or the foot of the opposite bed in multi-bed rooms. And that's, in doubt, get your tape measure out. Make sure it happens. In multi-bed rooms, a method of ensuring visual privacy for each resident shall be provided. Now that can be a curtain. I think that's what most people think of. But it also could be a screen. if the resident wants it. Now, if you've got two residents that are best friends or they just don't care, you know, oh, don't bother me, I'll get up and run around buck naked, I could care less than my resident. But now maybe the roommate's like, I don't want to see him buck naked. Give me a screen, give me a curtain. You've got to make sure you have it and it is available. They don't have to use it, but they have to have the availability of it. A minimum temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit in occupied areas for winter conditions and 85 for summer conditions. Okay? So, 85 is pretty warm to most people. Actually, I think 85 is perfect. Love 85. 72, I'm going to be complaining to you. I am cold natured. But if you're at 72, you're okay, and then you say, "I'll give Jerry a blanket." You're okay. You've met the regulation. But if it's not, if it's 1 degree one way or the other, you've not met the regulations. Now, if you can tell me that our air conditioner is broke, we've got it it's being worked on, we're maintaining temperatures, but they're fluctuating a little, but we're also making sure during summer conditions everybody's hydrated. This is our plans, this is what's going on, we have fans. You have systems in place, that's what's important. You're taking care of the resident. Same thing in winter conditions. But if it's going to be an extended period of time, or the temperatures start climbing significantly, that's another story. You're probably going to have to make other provisions. Sometimes they can bring in those giant air conditioning units that look like alien spaceships and put them outside and pump air in, or heating systems or whatever. But you got to do something. You got to show us how you're going to maintain the safety of residents in any sort of extreme conditions. How you're going to try to make sure you meet these. And that if you don't, that it's only for a very short period of time, and what you're doing in the meantime. And I would notify our office as quickly as possible, because guess what? If you don't, we're going to get a dozen calls from somebody. We're going to get them anyway, but I'd rather hear what's going on, what the facility's doing. Hot water temperature. For residents, the temperature 100 to 110, not 111, not 112, not 120, and certainly not 130. And we have found all of those temperatures in resident rooms. What you'll usually see is a surveyor will start out taking different temperatures. They may take one at this room at the end of this wing, this room at the end of this wing, maybe one in between or two in between. They may take every one of them. It just depends on the surveyor. But they want to get an idea. Water regulators, temperature regulators, sometimes work really, really well. Sometimes they don't work so well, depending on how the facility's set up. But what it comes down to is 110. Now, you'll have a resident say, 110? That's not near hot enough. I tend to like really hot water. But at the same time, I'm not going to scald myself. Hopefully, not yet. But in your facility, the regulation says 110. It has to be 110. And you're going to have people complain. But that's what the regulation requires. It cannot be over 110. Now, how do you maintain that? What's your system? What's your policy? Do you check it weekly? Do you check it daily? Who does it? How do you verify that? If it goes over, or if it goes under 100, who gets notified? What's the expectation? Those are all kinds of questions that I would ask the facility. And because water temperature can scald fragile skin, you are actual, because remember we're talking once again, continuous supervision to ensure healthcare is met. If I end up with a resident who has scalded skin, obviously something didn't work. That can easily become a type A citation, and those are followed with large civil money penalties. And that doesn't help anybody. Let's just not ever let that happen. So be very careful about these water temperatures, because it is something that's fairly easy. The thermometer will tell you what the temperature is, and if it's a problem, then you can make sure all residents stop using the water until we get this under control. We do extra monitoring, we do extra supervision, something to get this under control. Okay? And then we go on to talk about dishwasher and laundry. Basically, temperatures can be reduced to 140 if a chloritizer is used. Jackie, you can step in here if I'm wrong. Most detergents today have built-in sanitizers and stuff, don't they? So if the temperature is like 140 and you use a standard detergent, aren't you okay?
Usually the sanitizer goes in through the rinse cycle.
Through the rinse cycle?
Which is the detergent, the washing cycle.
180 is really hot water, or super hot, okay? When you're talking about laundry, I think it's a similar situation. If you're using something, because you're not going to pour chlorine bleach in with colored clothes. So just make sure that whatever you're using, read the directions on it so that you're in compliance and that you can show the surveyor that you are in compliance, or have your water temperatures correct. But wow, that's hot. Reading lights should be provided for each resident when appropriate. Night lights, we talked about that in definitions. And works patient rights. Do you want
This is the flying session.
Yes.
Y'all have your wings on? Do you have your landing gear? Because you're going to need it. We will fly through this. I have 30 minutes to cover a whole lot of areas, but we really wanted to focus on operations and services as much as possible, giving you all some really good examples. And I hope that we've given you all some good ideas, some things to go back to work and think about and implement. So for patient rights, every resident in a long-term care facility shall have at least the following rights. 800, before admission to a long-term care facility, the resident responsible party or his family member or his guardian shall be fully informed in writing as evidenced by the resident's written acknowledgement and that of the responsible party or his responsible family member or his guardian. All of services available at the long-term care facility, like we discussed in the very beginning. And you shall keep the original document of each written acknowledgement in the resident's personal file.
So we need to see that signed information that you provided them.
Before admission to a long-term care facility, the resident responsible, I'm not going to keep reading all that, shall be fully informed in writing as evidenced by the resident's written acknowledgement of all residents' responsibilities and rights as defined by this KRS. Every long-term care facility shall keep the written. Did you go backwards? I just repeated it? I'm like reading the same thing over and over again. You're going backwards.
No, that was 81. That's what it
Okay. All right.
is. It's the same thing.
This is discussing the ability to, all the services and charges, and to have the right to file complaints concerning charges which they deem unjustified to the appropriate local and state consumer protection agencies, and of course shall keep the original document in your file. All of this is in your reg manuals. We're going to keep going as we can to try to go forth and prosper. Residents shall be transferred or discharged only for medical reasons or his...
Oh, I'm sorry.
He's playing with me. Did you all see that?
I want to keep it true.
Or was I? Only for medical reasons or his own welfare, or that the other residents, or that of the other residents. And this is that situation where they can cause harm to other residents of your facility or to themselves, okay? Or for non-payment.
I'm sorry.
He's really going after it, isn't he? Except where prohibited by law or administrative regulation. Reasonable notice of such action shall be given to the resident and the responsible party. Rights and grievances. All residents shall be encouraged and assisted throughout their period of stay in your facility to exercise their rights as resident and a citizen of the United States. They have the right to vote still. Just because you come into this building and you live there now doesn't mean that you are no longer a citizen of the United States. And to this end, may voice grievances and recommend changes in policies and procedures and services to the facility staff and to outside representatives in regards to choice, free from restraint, interference, coercion, discrimination, or reprisal. So you have to have a grievance process, right? 805, all residents shall be free from mental and physical abuse and free from chemical and physical restraints except in emergencies. Please understand that free from mental and physical abuse does not have the exception in cases of an emergency. It's only the free from chemical and physical restraints. So this doesn't, some people have said, well, it says except in cases of emergency or except as thoroughly justified in writing by a physician. So what this is getting at is you are required to ensure that your residents in your facility are free from abuse. They're free from mental and physical. Also, if you're utilizing chemical or physical restraints, except in emergencies, that's when you utilize them as thoroughly justified in writing by a physician for a specified and limited period of time and documented in their medical record. Confidentiality as it relates to your records. All residents shall have confidential treatment of their medical and personal records. We all know about HIPAA, right? The requirements for everything to be confidential. It doesn't stop here, it's here as well. Each resident or his responsible family member or his guardian shall approve or refuse the release of such records to any individuals outside the facility except as otherwise specified in statute and regulation. Resident funds, that's a lot of words, isn't it? Residents may manage the use of his or her personal funds. If the facility accepts that responsibility for managing their funds, as evidenced by their written acknowledgement, they have to have proper accounting and monitoring of those funds. And it shall include each facility giving quarterly itemized statements to the resident and the responsible party about those funds. We have had problems with this particular aspect, and one of the issues is that some personal care homes, while they manage personal funds, they have someone doing it for them. Checks and balances need to be there. If you have someone managing personal funds account, are you auditing that account to make sure that the money is there for those residents? There have been issues in the past and the recent past where those persons who are controlling those funds are actually making use of that money themselves. One time they actually utilized the money and had specified that they just needed to borrow it for a small loan and put the money back in the account. They did put the money back in the account later, but while that money was out, of course, it wasn't theirs to borrow, number one. Number two, the facility didn't have a system of checks and balances to make sure that that was not actually occurring. And it's supposed to be in an interest-bearing account. So those persons lost interest when their money was extracted from their account. Okay. Privacy. If a resident is married, privacy shall be assured regarding spouse visits, and if they are both residents, they may share the same room unless they are at different levels of care or unless medically contraindicated and documented by a physician in the resident's medical records. No required services. Residents shall not be required to perform services for this facility that are not included for therapeutic purposes in their plan of care. What does that mean? Well, that means you're not going to, well, if you want to live here, you're going to have to go do the dishes today. Okay? That's what that means. Now, there are facilities who do have residents work for them, but that's the resident's choice, and it's part of their therapeutic plan to maintain independence and to be involved. Residents may associate and communicate privately with persons of their choice and send and receive personal mail unopened. That doesn't mean that the person that you have doing activities who distributes mail, that it's okay for them to bring their mail to you unopened, your mail to you unopened or open. So if a resident needs assistance with opening mail, that's one thing, but it should be done in front of them with their request of that staff person being asked to open it. Visual privacy wants to...
What is it?
811. He just wants to trip me up. Community access. No responsible resident shall be detained against his will. Residents shall be permitted and encouraged to go outdoors and leave the premises as they wish unless a legitimate reason can be shown and documented for refusing such activity. They still have rights as a human being. They still have rights as a citizen. Activities residents shall be permitted to participate in activities of social, religious, and community groups at their discretion. And remember, especially on the religious standpoint, You do have some residents in your facility who may not be of a religious affiliation. They may be agnostic. And you want to make sure that you don't send somebody who's agnostic to a Catholic church service, especially if they have some confusion. If you have somebody who speaks a different language also, you want to make sure that your staff are capable to communicate with that person, and that person is able to communicate with your staff. I had one resident in a facility who was Chinese, and she spoke her native language only. Increased behaviors continued and worsened because they were speaking English to her, and she could not understand a word. They sent her to Baptist church revivals, and nothing having to do with her life, her social history, her culture, and it did result in negative outcomes. So remember, that is something to consider in regards to participation in activities and freedom of choice. Visual privacy. Residents shall be assured of at least visual privacy in multi-bedrooms and in a tub, shower, and toilet rooms. I don't know about you. I don't kind of like going into a bathroom and everybody seeing what my business is. All right, choice of physician. The resident and the responsible party or his responsible family member shall be permitted the choice of a physician. Adjudicated incompetent, we've talked about several times today. The resident is adjudicated mentally disabled in accordance with state law. The resident's guardian shall act on the resident's behalf in order that his rights be implemented. And it's also your responsibility, once again, to ensure that you know what that adjudication specifies.
And let me bring up something here real quick. If you're adjudicated incompetent, regardless of what the law has said or the judge has said about your competency, it doesn't mean you have no rights. So you can't say you must eat your peas. You're incompetent. No, I don't have to eat my peas no matter what my competency level is. So we can be reasonable about this. Maybe I don't get to make certain decisions, but don't make me eat peas, okay?
And that leads us to the next one. Treating everybody with dignity and respect. The old adage, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Treat with consideration, respect, and full recognition of his dignity and individuality, including privacy in treatment and in care for his personal needs. I personally believe that there's no entity out there who comes into the program to provide poor services or to treat people disrespectfully. And I don't believe that you try to hire someone who's going to do that. You know, if it weren't for you, we'd have many people out there who wouldn't have a home, or who wouldn't have people who were capable of taking care of our elderly persons. So treating people with respect is very important. Patient rights medical information. Every resident, responsible party, and family member guardian has the right to be fully informed of the resident's medical condition unless medically contraindicated and documented by the physician in the resident's medical record. Remember that whole aspect of communication we keep talking about? Here we go again. Fully informed. Suitable clothing. They have the right to be dressed at all times and given assistance when needed in maintaining body hygiene and good grooming. Telephone access. Shall have access to a telephone at a convenient location within the facility for making and receiving telephone calls. Should they have the right to privacy for that telephone call? Absolutely. Family notification. Shall be notified immediately of any accident, sudden illness, disease, unexplained absence, or anything unusual involving the resident. It's a requirement. Private meetings with the appropriate long-term care facility inspector. So when we come out to see if you're in compliance, your residents should be able to meet with us privately. Okay. Inspection reports. You need to have the inspection reports available for people to take a look at. Usually your facilities are maintaining them in your front lobby. Physician documentation. The above stated rights shall apply in all cases unless medically contraindicated and documented by a physician in writing in the resident's medical record. And I'll let you read legal action.
That's just telling the resident they have the right to pursue legal action if the rights aren't met.
Right. For all purposes of supplementing the rights of residents in long-term care facilities, such facilities shall take the following actions. Every long-term care facility shall conspicuously post throughout the facility a listing of residents' rights and responsibilities. Shall develop and implement. This is very important, guys. You didn't see it in operations and services. This is where you see it. You see it in patient rights. Shall develop and implement a mechanism which will allow each resident and the responsible party or his responsible family member or guardian to participate in the planning of the resident's care. Each resident shall be encouraged and provided assistance in planning of his care. You have to be able to tell us what your mechanism is in regards to developing that person's care, that plan of care. So, what is your system? How do your staff know what your system is and know what care has to be provided and what type of assistance? So that's what it's talking about. Do you have a care plan? Is that how you discuss this? Is that how you communicate to staff when you're not there? What is your mechanism? And it has to be implemented. And you have to involve the residents and family to encourage them to be a participant. Complaint and recommendations, as we already discussed. You have to have procedures for the submission and resolution of complaints and recommendations by the residents. Such policies shall be conspicuously displayed throughout the facility, pending approval of their adequacy by the cabinet. Policies and training. Every long-term care facility shall prepare a written plan and provide appropriate staff training to implement each of the residents' rights as defined. OIG inspection reports, that's us. All long-term care facilities shall retain in their facilities at least one copy of the most recent inspection report. The cabinet shall provide all long-term care facilities with one copy of that most recent inspection report. But we also have another reg that specifies you have to maintain 3 years worth of your statements of deficiencies and plans of correction available for review. Nursing home reform regulations. It goes into the daily visiting hours, and we're just going to keep going right on through. We've got a lot to cover in a short period of time. It talks about persons allowed access to the facility during visiting hours, rights and duties. Go ahead.
Unrestricted access by employees of the cabinet. That's going to be us, DCBS. So they have unrestricted access.
A long-term care facility shall assure during visiting hours established accordance with KRS 216 something or another.
Yeah.
Family members, guardians, friends of the individual, as well as other persons who wish to visit one or more residents and whose purpose is other than the unsolicited sale of a product or service. Community, individuals representing community organizations or service agencies who will provide free of charge service for educational programs to residents. Service representatives, an employee or representative of any private nonprofit court or association that qualifies for tax-exempt status, whose primary purpose for visiting include counseling residents and resolving problems and complaints concerning their care and treatment and assisting the residents in securing adequate services to meet their needs. Access limitations. Persons assured access to long-term care facilities pursuant to this section have the right to enter the facility without prior notice, meet with one or more residents, and observe the operation of the facility and its effects on the resident. Such authority shall not include the right to examine financial records of the facility without the consent of the administrator, nor the clinical and financial records of any resident without the prior consent of the resident or the resident's guardian or committee. Yes? Entrance requirements. Persons assured access to long-term care facilities shall, upon entering such facility, promptly advise the administrator and the designated representative of their presence, and except that members of residents' families or legal guardian or of a resident need not advise the administrator or designated representative of his presence upon entering the facility. Not enter the living area of any resident without identifying themselves first. So we've got to let them know when we're there.
And knock on the door.
And knock on the door, because that's respectful and it shows consideration, right? And it's their home. Terminate and deny visits. Individual residents shall have the right to terminate or deny any visits to them by persons assured access to the facility pursuant to this section. Administrator shall have the right to terminate or deny visitation in accordance with criteria and regulations promulgated by the cabinet. And then unrestricted access, any representative or employee of the cabinet, including our long-term care ombudsman, who is also an advocate for residents in long-term care facilities, any representative and employee of any local government entity that has a responsibility regarding residents of long-term care facilities, or the legal guardian of any individual resident shall have unrestricted access to long-term care facilities. Okay, keep going. You shall post in a conspicuous place accessible to residents, employees, visitors, the following: copy of long-term care facilities license, which we issue by our office, the ombudsman's name and address, telephone number, visitation, a list of materials available, inspection reports for 3 years, service descriptions, rates and charges, additional charges, any court orders. Posting requirements: you have to post a sign within 10 feet of the front reception desk and in a prominent place, easily seen by residents, employees, and visitors. A printed sign at least 8 inches by 11 with letters at least 1 inch high that states, state law requires state inspection reports on this facility to be made available to you upon request, and ask the representative of this facility. Postings and statements. We're going to keep going. Go ahead, type-A citations. We're going to cover that. We're going to fly through type-A citations. A lot of facilities get cited a type-A citation, and I want to give you all a little information as it relates to type-A citation. We issue a type-A and B citation to facilities when there's serious occurrences happening. Licensed facilities can be issued to type-A, to the following licensed facilities, and of course you're going to see licensed personal care comes here. We only issue these citations to long-term care facilities. Go ahead. Type-A citation is a violation by a long-term care facility which presents an imminent danger to any resident of a long-term care facility and creates substantial risk that death or serious mental or physical harm to a resident will occur. This will be issued to your facility. Once you're told that you have a type-A citation going to be issued to you, we have to get it to you within 3 calendar days of being told. A type-B citation: violations by a long-term care facility of the regulations, standards, and requirements which presents a direct or immediate relationship to the health, safety, or security of any resident, but which does not create an imminent danger. This will be issued within 5 days of us telling you that you have a type-A or type-B being issued. With these citations, there can be penalties assessed. The DHC stands for Division of Health Care. Determines the amount of the initial penalty to be imposed, and that determination is based on factors detailed in KRS 216.525. In your manual, you have these statutes and what it specifies in order to, and how we determine whether you'll have a civil money penalty. You can appeal this process and appeal that citation. A civil money penalty will only be charged automatically to a type-A citation. Type-B citations, you have the ability to correct by a specific time. If you get that type-B citation removed and corrected by that date that we specify you have to have it corrected, you will not have a penalty imposed. If you don't, type-B citations will go into effect based on the requirements. You can have citation penalties for a type-B that has not been corrected in a timely manner. If you've had citation in the last year issued to your facility, it can cause the civil money penalty charged to your facility to be trebled. If within the last 12 months of the date of issuance of those citations, we're required to treble that penalty, which means it's going to be bigger. Keep going. So you have the resources in your manuals, the statutes and the regulations as it relates to type A and B citations. In regards to the overview of the survey process, our state agency conducts relicensure surveys and we conduct complaint investigations. When you look in your manual, there is a tab that says, I think it says license procedures. I'm not sure which tab that is for you. Number 12. And that tells you about our lovely survey process, how we're able to come into your facility, how we issue a license to you, how you have to submit an application for initial licensure. It tells you that we're going to come out and we're going to conduct an inspection, an on-site inspection, to determine whether you're in compliance with our regulations. When we do that and we come out to your facility, we are going to conduct for a relicensure survey and go through several tasks. We're going to do an off-site survey preparation where we look at your facility's history. We look at what we have cited in the last year and what's been cited previously. What deficiencies are recurrent? What do you keep having the same? Do you have the same deficiency being repeatedly cited every year? Have we cited deficiencies on a complaint investigation? When we go into task 2, we're going to do an entrance conference with the administrator or whoever's the person in charge. And we're going to explain to you all the purpose of our visit. Are we there for a relicensure survey or for a complaint investigation or both? We are going to explain that survey process to you, what we'll be doing, request specific information. And in the back of this, under miscellaneous forms for your level of care, we actually provided to you a detailed listing of the documents that you need to make available to us. So you can always be prepared, okay? And then we're going to have the ability to have questions and answers. You ask questions, we try to give you the answer, and if we don't know the answer, we're going to find it for you. We're immediately going to go into initial tour, and we're going to make observations. Observations of you, observations of your staff, observations of the residents, observations of visitors. We're going to conduct interviews. We are going to watch interaction. We're going to do skin assessments if there's an issue with the resident and their skin. We're going to look at your environment and we're going to either validate or invalidate concerns. We'll do a resident review. We will actually look at your records. We will ask you for policies and procedures. We're going to take a sample of residents from our initial tour and do record review process, which will also include those observations, interviews, and record review. In task 5, that's information gathering. That's also where we're doing a full look at your general observation of the facility. Is it homelike? Is it clean? Is it dangerous? Do you have tiles sticking up out of the floor that residents are tripping on? Once again, interviews with families, interviews with doctors, interviews with psychiatrists that have seen specific residents. We're going to do resident reviews. We're going to do closed record reviews, and we're going to review your policies and procedures. And we're going to ask you for these policies and procedures. And it's not because we found a problem. We want to know what your process is. What is your system? And do your staff know about it? After we pull together all of our information, we're going to take a look at the facts before us and determine whether there are deficiencies that will be cited. All information collected, and it includes observation, interview, and record review. And then we make a determination of compliance based on regulatory compliance. So we're going to take out our little reg manuals based on the information that we have and the information you all provided with us to see if there's a deficient practice. At task 7, that's exit conference. Providers, you as the facility, a resident, multiple residents can attend this. The ombudsman, we try to get a hold of our ombudsman who comes to your facility to participate. And we provide you with information. We'll provide you with the sample listing of our sample selection of residents. You, the administrator, will be the one who gets it. And then we will tell you the tags or the areas in which we've identified deficient practice and those residents who were affected by it. Understand that everything that we tell you in our exit conference is subject to supervisory review. We may tell you on that day we've identified deficiencies in these areas at P115. They may go back to the office, and once it's reviewed and discussed with their supervisor may think that it actually rises to the level of a type B or a type A citation. Everything is subject to supervisory review. On the flip side of that, we may also determine, the supervisors in the office may determine that there's not enough information to determine that that's actually a deficient practice. So until you receive that final document, the statement of deficiencies that comes to your facility, those findings in that exit conference are subject to supervisory review. You may have more deficiencies, you may have less deficiencies. Okay? The statement of deficiency is our written notice. We get that document to you, and then you all have 10 days to get that back upon the date of receipt. You can find that requirement under that license procedure. It details exactly what the deficient practice or the plan of correction has to have in it. There's 3 requirements. It's also in your handouts. I have probably less than a minute. I have 0 minutes. So, one thing also I do want you all to be aware of, how many of you know that you as a personal care home have the ability for informal dispute resolution? Do you know what that is? Raise your hand if you know it. Okay. Please make sure that you go into the back of this and read these slides. Every facility has the ability for an informal dispute resolution. The issue with that, if you request an informal dispute resolution for a tag you've been cited, you have to have that request for IDR, that's the acronym, to us by the same mandated return date of the plan of correction to Nancy Spiller, our nurse consultant inspector in the Frankfurt office. That has to be received by that 10th day. Okay? There's all sorts of information in your manuals and in your handouts with slides that gives you a little more information as it relates to informal dispute resolution. So you can go before IDR panel, you can request a telephone conference and provide more information to prove that it's a deficient practice or that it's not a deficient practice. One thing that I really want to strongly encourage every one of you is while we're in that facility, provide us with whatever information you possibly can. I know you feel that it's a very adversarial process, but we're doing an investigation. When we come into your facility, we're coming in with an open mind. You have a clean slate. Yes, we look at your history, but as far as we're concerned, you have a history that you've already submitted plans of correction for, and you've attested by signing on that dotted line that you have corrected those deficiencies. So we have a history in mind, but we come in and you have no deficiencies until we can prove otherwise. The more information you can provide our surveyors with what you've done, the more evidence that you can provide to us, and answering our questions. Just because we ask a question doesn't mean we're identifying deficient practice. We're just trying to determine what your system is and trying to determine if there is a problem. That's what we're trying to do. That's what our job is. And only with the information that you provide us can we make a determination to see if there is compliance or non-compliance. Many times when we've conducted surveys, facilities don't want staff to talk to us. They don't want to provide us with documents or evidence. If you can't provide us with the evidence that you did something, and your staff aren't able to talk to us to tell us that they did something, then we have no evidence to prove that you actually did it when you were supposed to. So our recommendation to you is please talk to our surveyors. If you have questions, if they're asking questions, you can always ask us questions. The more information you can provide to us, we'll probably have less issues. And you'll probably find that it'll be more of an advantage for you as an entity to give that information. There's nothing more frustrating for anybody than for you to have to respond in 10 days to a 30-page document of deficiencies. and then request an informal dispute resolution, have to do all that work to provide us with the evidence that it's not an efficient practice. Had you provided the information while we were on site, you wouldn't have had all those deficiencies. And then you wouldn't have had to have developed the plan of correction. Then you wouldn't have had to do all the work to get that informal dispute resolution documentation to our office. So the more information you can provide to us is a benefit for you. And I can tell you right now, I don't know of any one of our state agency representatives in here who just absolutely loves writing a statement of deficiency. If you all love it, raise your hand. I don't like reading them. So I know that we flew through this last half and we were not able to get to everything. Jerry Mayo has done an excellent job. I wish that you please applaud him. I'd like to thank Jackie and Gay and Shirley and Sandy and Andrea Wilhite for joining us. They are representatives in the southern and the eastern enforcement branches.
And are happy for you to, on-site or in the office, if you have a question or you have a concern, to call them, to talk to them. One of the things that I encourage everybody to do in a facility is if you have a surveyor telling you that we have non-compliance and you don't think that it is non-compliance, talk to that individual. Ask them to show you that regulation. Because I may come in and say, I think you need 2 chairs in every residence room, you need a sofa. If there's not a regulation, that's my opinion. My opinions are not cited. They're not non-compliant. Now, sometimes we can look at a regulation, read it, and both have a different idea. At that point, we need to get from our central office a definitive guideline as to what that means. But do not feel free, do not feel intimidated or that you cannot ask a question or that you cannot disagree. And I encourage people to use the IDR process. But first, do everything you can while the surveyor is on site to provide them with that information, because as Sam said, it just wastes a tremendous amount of everybody's time, and you're too busy for that, and so are we.
Do you all have any questions? I know we slammed a whole bunch in the last half, and we do apologize. Any questions? Anyone? Did you find it positive? Did you learn anything? Well, that's always, and we kept you awake. I saw a few yawns, but I'm sure that was the carbs.